Materials supplied by Microsoft Corporation may be used for internal review, analysis, or research only. Any editing, reproduction, publication, rebroadcast, public showing, internet, or public display is forbidden and may violate copyright law.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Lucy van der Wendy, and I'd like to introduce Wendy Chapman, who's going to be giving the talk this morning. Thank you very much for coming to Seattle when it's living up to its reputation of being rainy. Wendy is the chair of the Biomedical Informatics Department at the University of Utah, and her work lies in the intersection of clinical research, NLP, and human-computer interface, or interaction, HCI. She's the leading figure, really, the leading figure in biomedical informatics. Hui-Feng and I met with her. We've known of Wendy for a long time, but we met at the NLP workshop that was convened at the Veterans Administration Department, Wendy is an affiliate faculty. And so, as some of you may know, the Veterans Administration has one of the largest and most comprehensive electronic medical record systems, and that it has pioneered the Million Veterans Program, where it has sought consent for research to sequence the genomics and access the records, the EMR records for 1 million veterans, which is a unique resource. And Wendy knows about this and hopefully will tell us more about data mining, information extraction, and how we can use that information to improve the outcome for our patients. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate, I don't need this anymore, the opportunity. And so it is rainy here, and when I left Salt Lake, it was 36 and sunny. And when I came here, it was 46 and cloudy, and it felt a lot colder. That humidity. But there's been a big snowstorm there, so the university's all but closed down today. My husband biked to work on a fat bike. Said it was very, very difficult in the snow, and sent me pictures. So I've received a lot of texts and phone calls about getting into the office today. So hopefully.
They've got their skis open now.
If you had your skis, it was all uphill there. Going down will be fine. Okay, I'm really happy to be here. And my focus in research is natural language processing, in particular information extraction. So that's what my talk will be focused on. I'll give you a little bit of background. So I talked with Hui-Feng that I lived in Hong Kong and learned Cantonese. And so that's really how I got this love of language. I went back at the University of Utah, and I studied linguistics and Mandarin Chinese for my bachelor's degree. In between here, I went to the University of Wisconsin to study Chinese literature. That's what I was going to get my PhD in, and I was admitted but didn't have funding. I waited another year, still no funding, and then in the meantime, my husband, who Lucy met at a Johns Hopkins workshop, found medical informatics and wanted to do that. He was moving from electrical engineering, and then I saw that they do natural language processing, and I thought, well, that seems like a really nice way to apply my love of linguistics to something practical. So I signed up, led it on probation, and the rest is all history. I fell in love with the field. I went to Pittsburgh to do a postdoc for 3 years, and then stayed on there as faculty, so I was in Pittsburgh for 10 years. Moved to UC San Diego in my attempt to get back to the West, and then this opportunity came open at the University of Utah for the chair position. It was a big career switch for me. I still do research, but about 3/4 of a day a week. But I have a really great team that's moving forward well, but I'm not in the details as much as I would like to be. So I want to give a little bit of context about healthcare in the United States. Here we have a graph. The x-axis is the amount of spending the total expenditure of healthcare per capita, and then the y-axis is the life expectancy. And you can see that we spend way more than anybody else, and our life expectancy is nothing to brag about. So the U.S. healthcare right now is really in crisis. And that means that the economy is in crisis because our healthcare spending is such a huge part of our economy. Now, some people see crisis as an opportunity. That's what I'm learning in all my leadership classes. And so, there's this great, and it really is an opportunity to transform healthcare, because the way healthcare is run has been so awful. The incentives have really benefited hospitals and doctors, but they haven't benefited patients. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a whole different world where it's really patient-centered. And so it really is an opportunity, and the pressure is from the finances. There's a big movement that we have a lot of data now. We have a lot of digital data. And so we need to be learning from that data. Every patient that comes in needs to be learned from, so that we know what are the better treatments and what things don't work. And then with all the big data science and big data analytics. So here's an article in JAMA about academic health centers are really at risk right now because they're more expensive. So why is someone going to pay more to go to an academic health center rather than to a community health center? And really what they see is that the advantage of an academic health center is the research. But if you can translate that research, and if you can take all the knowledge that you have and apply it to the data and learn from it and create better practices and implement them, then you're going to really have an edge. But that's the only way that we're going to be able to really get where we want to go. So I would say then that healthcare transformation needs natural language processing, because a lot of the information in the electronic medical record is in text. I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, in clinical decision support, there's a system called the Antibiotic Assistant that's implemented at Intermountain Healthcare, and it monitors in the background a patient's temperature, white blood cell count, and all these different variables to determine whether or not the patient develops a new infection in the hospital. If they do develop a new infection, it will alert the physician, and it will say, we think your patient has an infection. Here's why. Here's the evidence. Here's the dose and the type of antibiotic we think they should take based on their insurance and their allergies, etc. It's a very popular program and has saved a lot of money and a lot of lives. And it needs information from the chest X-ray report to be able to say, does the patient have an infiltrate that's indicative of pneumonia? Another area in the clinical research realm is readmissions to the hospital. Costs the Medicare program a lot of money. And a huge portion of that is potentially preventable. We can prevent these readmissions. There are a lot of readmission models that are being created, and they're created from ICD codes, discharge diagnoses, lab values, this coded data that are in databases. But they don't have very good predictive value. So some people are hypothesizing if we can get information out of the text, which includes more detailed symptoms, but also social risk factors that really make that patient at risk for not taking care of themselves, we might be able to improve our prediction of readmission. And the social risk factors are things like, do they have a stable housing situation? Are they abusing substances? What's their living condition? Do they have social support at home? Can they bathe themselves? These kind of things really affect whether a patient's going to care for their wound and take their medications. And these are all described in various ways in the text. So healthcare transformation needs natural language processing. And indeed, about 70% of the clinical data that we're interested in is locked inside this text. Now, Jeff Hammerbacher, who's the founder and chief scientist of Cloudera and was at Facebook previously, said the best minds of my generation are thinking about how to make people click ads. That sucks. So I'm here to say there's some great minds here. We need some of that brain power to transform healthcare. All right, so my objectives are first to convince you, because we have two people here who are already at Microsoft and working in natural language processing in the medical domain. But out of a lot of researchers at Microsoft, let's get more people working on this area. And then to talk about, well, what do we need to do to make it a product and make it effective and be used? And so focusing on some informatics principles where we're not just trying to improve scores a little bit at a time on little parts, but how do we really build something that's usable? And I don't have the answer. I can just point out some principles and some problems. Okay, so everyone knows, people know about natural language processing more now because of Jeopardy. And there was a big, follow-up about computer world. I just love this article. It could very well herald a whole new era in medicine. Like no one had ever thought of applying computers to medicine until Jeopardy. And so now there's more knowledge about what we can do. People have been working on natural language processing applied to clinical reports in a variety of different domains. And in these focused areas, we can build systems that perform as well as people. But clinical NLP has been a research focus since the 1960s. So why do we still not have an NLP system in every hospital? Why are we not just automatically annotating all the data that's coming through and storing that in encoded form? Well, there are a few barriers, I think, that have put us way behind the other NLP, the general NLP field. And the main one is getting the data. So sharing clinical data is just so difficult. We haven't had shared data sets for development and evaluation. And when we try to adapt modules that are trained on general English, they just don't work as well. We haven't had standard conventions for annotations. And so everyone creates their own annotated corpora, and nobody can share. And so it's one person at a time and a lot of repetition. And in the past, there wasn't a lot of collaboration in NLP. There were a few people that were the main NLP people, but there wasn't a lot of collaboration. Now, I'd say over the last 5 years, these things have changed to a large extent. We've developed resources that are shareable. We've created common schemas that people use, and there's a lot more collaboration going on. But we're just, it's slow progress. But to me, the biggest barrier is that what we build as NLP researchers is just so far upstream from what people need that there's just a huge gap. So I would claim that if we want to have impact, we have to go beyond improving our accuracy of the individual tools to creating things that can be applied to real-world problems. So I want to talk about 3 informatics principles that I think we could apply to NLP and that can help in this area. First of all, to be application-driven. Second, think about user-centered design. And third, pay attention to standards. So I'll go through each one of those in a little bit of detail. So when you run an NLP system, in the information extraction system, on a sentence like no family history of colon cancer, there's a pipeline with all different types of NLP tools, and you break up the sentence into its syntactic and parts, and you assign semantic values like this maps to this vocabulary item, and it's negated. And that's the output, and it's very important, and it's hard to get that output and to get it to have it be accurate. But what the users want is not, show me all the UMLS concepts in the text and tell me if they're negated. They want to know, how do I improve was my colonoscopy exam high quality, and if not, why? Find patients with carotid stenosis so I can see whether medication works or surgery. They definitely want to know, how do I get higher billing codes? That's one area where industry has jumped in and really helped out because there's a business case, right? How do I spend less time documenting? And how do I find all the information that people have already documented? I can't find what I'm looking for. There's too much information. How do we help patients understand their reports? So these are the types of applications that people want. And so there's this big gap between the NLP output and these applications. And NLP researchers may not be the ones driving these applications, but they need to be involved and partnering on those. And so the difficult part, though, is how do you be application driven and still develop general purpose tools? Because we can build an application for one particular thing, and then when we want to build it for another diagnosis, we start from scratch. And so it's really finding that balance between being application driven and being general purpose. Well, to do that, we really need this strong partnership with domain experts who have the insight about what the data are needed for. An example of that would be if you're going to create a knowledge base for cough. So I started this work when I was a postdoc, and I went to the National Library of Medicine, and I said, I'm going to build something to find out if there's respiratory findings. So first I'm just going to find all the UMLS concepts that map to the concepts I care about. And I just had no idea that in cough, there were 20 UMLS concepts for cough. And I sometimes wouldn't find them all either. So what do you mean by cough? We have to explicitly model what we mean by cough. When we look at things like, I want to find patients with fever, it's not just looking for words like fever and febrile, but there's attribute value pairs that have to be found. And those depend on the application that you're building. So how do you represent your knowledge in a way so that for this application, they have the threshold at 38, and for another application, they might have it at 37? How do you not just hard code everything you're doing for every single application? Because that's not scalable. All right, the second principle is to be user-centered. We need to be able to support users and So we have to think about the way their brains work. And then we have to fit it in the workflow because it's not an individual taking care of a patient, it's a team. And there's this whole workflow, and how does this information fit into the workflow? So we first build accurate tools, but then beyond that, they have to be useful, and beyond that, they have to be scalable and deployable. And those are things that, we spend a lot of time focusing on the accuracy, but not on the other parts. And I think that to really succeed in healthcare and a lot of other domains, but healthcare is complicated, the technical is just one tiny part. And there's all these spheres of the clinical, sociological, political, and commercial spheres that we have to be aware of to be able to really build the tools that people need. And finally, paying attention to standards. We need to better leverage existing resources so that what we build is interoperable. There are vocabularies, and we do that in large part with the vocabularies. But information modeling, we don't only want to know that this maps to a certain vocabulary item, but we need to know the context of it. We need to know, for blood pressure, we need to know what position was the patient in, what was used to take the blood pressure. There's all this information that goes with this metadata, that goes with that concept or that action that's important for interpretation. And so as NLP developers, we need to be extracting all of that type of information and modeling it. And then how do we model it in a way that we can use it in different EMRs and different settings? So, well, how does this all relate to NLP researchers? And I would say that a lot of the NLP research problems that we work on are really far upstream from the healthcare applications. But there are a lot of new, interesting NLP research problems that arise when you start when you are working on user-driven development of clinical applications. And so it's not like you're abandoning research and saying, oh, I'm just going to be applied. There are many research problems that come up when you're trying to build things that people use. So I want to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing to try to bridge this gap in our lab. And it's one small part of the world. And our lab is the Biomedical Language Understanding Lab. And that's an old slide. It still says University of California, San Diego. We hadn't moved our website, but we did move it now, so I need to replace that slide. So we're building a toolkit, and this is funded from the VA, called IEVIS, Information Extraction and Visualization. And it's a workbench to help domain experts and NLP experts collaborate and build applications that are useful while taking advantage of existing NLP tools. So it has 4 parts to it. First, you need to create your knowledge base about what you're trying to represent and what you want to extract. Next, you need to create NLP tools. And by create, there's a lot of NLP tools out there. Can you apply things that already exist and compare them and use, the Watson model of lots of different evidence coming in to develop the best tool for each thing you're trying to extract. Oftentimes, extractions just is part of the problem, but sometimes you only need a classifier. Sometimes you need a classifier after the extraction. So how do we help people build classifiers that integrate knowledge from the NLP that's beyond bag of words? And we haven't really gotten to this part much on the visualization, but they don't want an XML file with a bunch of concepts marked. They want a graph, or they want a timeline, or something like that. So how do we help them build that from the NLP output? All right, the first step then is knowledge authoring. So we've developed 2 ontologies, a domain schema ontology and a modifier ontology. The domain schema lists it's a linguistic representation of the clinical elements that can be described in text. The modifier ontology tells which modifiers are allowable by each of those elements, so that when you extract the information from a sentence like this, here's the disease, who experienced it, was it negated or not? Was it historical or not? And so it's an information model around the concept of cancer. So these ontologies, and when I say the word ontology, they're not ontologies like the kind of ontologies that represent reality. They're representing information in text. So they're lexical resource ontologies. And so here we have that there are elements that you could describe in a report. There are entities, like a person, and there are events. Most things that you describe are events, like allergies, problems, which are diagnoses, findings, etc., vital signs. Those are the types of things that you might see described in a clinical report that you're interested in extracting. They can have relationships with each other. A finding can be evidence of a diagnosis. A medication can treat a disease, and so on. And so we can model those relationships. And then those elements, the modifiers are very important for understanding what's going on when you describe something in the text. So you can see the word pneumonia in all three of these sentences. And if all you're looking for is the word pneumonia, you're going to misinterpret because every one of those has a different interpretation. So knowing which modifiers are allowable for each of those is very important. So that's what the modifier ontology is. And what it is it started out as the NegX knowledge base and stored in OWL format. And then context, which is an algorithm that we developed, it extended from there, and then we added more and more modifiers. So it's kind of an extension from that. So it has different types of modifiers, like does something exist, and it definitely exists, or is there uncertainty about the existence? Is it talking about the future? Is it talking about the past? Is it an indication for exam, etc. And then but it also is a lexicon, and so it has linguistic expressions that we've seen that indicate that. So for historical, again, noted, previous, changing, those are things that indicate that something happened in the past. It has actions because the scope of the modifier is important, and sometimes the scope goes forward, most of the time the scope goes forward, like no tumor, but sometimes it goes backwards, like tumor-free. And so everything that you need to run NegX or context is encoded in here, the direction that it goes. And then it's translated into some languages, Swedish, German, and French right now. And so a lot of people have written papers about applying the algorithm and with these terms to different languages and how well does it transfer. So the schema ontology imports the modifier ontology. If you have a medication event, then the modifier ontology says you also need to know, you can know the type, the dose, the frequency, and the route of the medication. If you have a diagnosis event, then it can have severity, it can have the history. And we've developed this from models that have been built out of the SHARP project. And so some people here are familiar with the SHARP project. We built a C-takes common type system. And that was the basis of our ontologies, and then we've extended beyond there to map to information models in the clinical world. And they're mapped to FHIR now for people who are interested in HL7 FHIR. So what these allow a user to do is to create a domain ontology that's used for natural language processing. And a domain ontology would be an instance of the schema ontology, and it would represent the linguistic information that you want to know about clinical elements within a particular domain. And so if you're working on pneumonia, for instance, then what are all the concepts that you care about to indicate pneumonia? And then you'll use that for the natural language as the knowledge base for the natural language processing system and the target output. So I'll give you an example. Here is a domain ontology for pneumonia. And it's just the very beginning of one. And so we see under diagnosis that we have altered mental status, heart condition, lung condition, and pneumonia. Those are 4 instances of the class diagnosis. But in there, then we have the whole lexicon. What are the synonyms for pneumonia? What are the misspellings? What are regular expressions? If there were numeric values, like if it was fever, you'd have numeric values to go along with it. And so you can explicitly define what you're looking for. And the goal behind this is to create these potentially open, shareable knowledge representation modules that people could borrow. And so if somebody else is looking for pneumonia, they don't have to start from scratch. I mean, how many of us have written about pneumonia? Several of us in this room. But if someone else is going to work on pneumonia with NLP, they start from scratch and build up their lexical expressions and their synonyms. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go to this library and you could say, oh, here's some definitions of pneumonia that people have had. And you could borrow and tweak and, kind of customize and start with what somebody else had already done. Yeah?
One question is that, so these patterns, sometimes they might be ambiguous. So do you think there would be use case where the pattern could be ambiguous and you actually want to capture the ambiguity level?
Like the regular expressions?
Yeah. Like maybe regex, in one case it means this uncertainty or something, in another case means something else.
Yeah, so part of addressing the ambiguity is specifying the modifiers. But the word sense disambiguation that might occur isn't addressed in this way. So that's definitely something that would have to be on top of this. Okay, so we've built a front-end interface because using Protégé is not natural for everybody. And so it's called Knowledge Author. And on the back end, you have the two ontologies that the user doesn't have to know anything about. It's just what's driving the questions you ask the user. And the output is a domain ontology and a schema for NLP systems. So for instance, you might want to create a variable called African American adult. Well, we have you'd create a person role, a person, and you can define their age, you can define their gender, their race, their death date, birth date, all the attributes and the modifiers that occur with a person. And so you can create very specific variables that you're trying to extract. And that's where the difference is between a general NLP system that's trying to output a concept like cough and a specific, in one study you might want productive cough. In another study you might want severe productive cough. In a different study you want mild productive cough. In another study you want they don't have a cough. So all those modifiers, they're like particular to applications that a single group or person is interested in. And we want to be able to model all that without, and that's where the information modeling comes in. So it gives you the power to create exactly what you're trying to filter on. Maybe what you're looking for is patients who are taking ibuprofen. And so when you type in ibuprofen, it'll map to the UMLS and you can select the concepts that you want. And when you select those, now all the synonyms and acronyms that are stored in that knowledge base become part of your knowledge base. But you might not just be interested in the mention of ibuprofen. You want to know that they're taking ibuprofen orally. And so with the modifier of form, you can say, I only want things that are oral. And so you're building these very specific variables. No family history of colon cancer. To a physician, this is one variable. They have no family history of colon cancer. But in NLP, this is a lot of different parts. It's cancer, that's the concept. It's the anatomic location of colon. It's occurred in the past. It's talking about the past history for a family member, and it didn't occur. Okay, so that's a lot of things that the NLP system has to output. And this way, so what we've split them out into these kind of linguistic variables like negation, who experienced it, and is it in the past or current or future. And those apply to all the different schema elements. But then for cancer, which is a disease, then you can also look at severity and other things like that. So we did a lot of user studies to try to figure out how to model this in a way that we could get the domain experts to understand it, because it seems so simple from an NLP point of view. What's the negation? But to them, it's just one concept. And then we've also worked on how do we suggest synonyms to them, because you can only think of so many synonyms, and so different algorithms for mining text, bringing forward synonyms and letting them select them. There are a lot of different research questions that we've addressed in the area of knowledge authoring. Which modifier is important? The modifier ontology has way too many. No one would want to use all those modifiers. It's every possible modifier that has been used in any clinical modeling. How well do people agree when they annotate them? Because if you can't get people to agree, it's very difficult to create a system that can do it. And some of them are very difficult to get agreement on, like uncertainty. How can we learn the terms? And that's what we've been talking with Huifeng about. Can we mine text and bootstrap and help learn these terms? And can we suggest other types of things like medications or treatments that might indicate the patient has that disease when the text doesn't explicitly say it? So lots of fun research questions there, and many of them unanswered. All right, so once you create a domain ontology, now you have the opportunity, you have all your knowledge explicitly defined, you can start running some NLP tools over your text and see what pops up. And so that's the NLP customization part of the workbench. And our vision is that there would be a lot of different NLP tools that you have access to. Why limit yourself? Why there are so many different tools available, and some might perform better on some variables and others on others. And so if you can set up a kind of a customization loop where you have the knowledge explicitly defined, now you run several different tools over using that knowledge, bring it back and show it to the user, or have some kind of gold standard, you picture kind of an iterative thing where they're correcting it, they're marking things that are wrong, it's learning, and it's over time it's kind of selecting and optimizing the best combination of tools for each different variable. In theory, there's no reason why you can't have one tool for 5 of the variables you're looking for, and a different tool for 3 of them, and another one for another 6. Especially if you start simple and say, sometimes keyword matching is good enough for some things when you add negation. Other things, you might need a machine learning classifier. Other things, you might need the syntax. But why use the more sophisticated things on the things you can get in an easier way? So a way to help the user interact with the system and develop those. But to do that, you really need some good tools for the user to interact with. And so we've spent quite a bit of time developing some different tools. And we still haven't, it doesn't feel like there's one tool. It feels like different tools have different strengths. This is the evaluation workbench, where you read in 2 annotated sets. And it might be that one's a gold standard and one's your system. It might be 2 different systems. But you're able to compare them against each other now and look at, if you consider one of them right and one of them the gold standard, then you can look at the false positives and the false negatives. And this allows you to drill down and see not only the extracted named entities, but all of their attributes and you can look at the attributes and see, really do an error analysis to see where your system screwed up compared to the gold standard. So that's one of the tools we've developed. This is another tool that we've been developing with colleagues at University of Pittsburgh. Lucy probably knows Jan Wiebe and Rebecca Hua. And this is a visualization tool where the table here are the variables that you've created in the domain ontology. And they're binary. They're true or false. Did they occur? And you give it a couple of training examples, and now it learns to annotate those. It's a classifier. And now you can start to drill down and give it feedback and highlight text that shows, no, you're wrong on this, and here's why I know. And so it has things like this word tree. You're looking at the word biopsy, and it will show all the words that occur with biopsy, before and after biopsy, and whether they were present or true or false in the text. And as you click on them, it takes you to the text. And so it's this interactive way to really try to understand what the system's doing, mark the evidence that it's wrong, and retrain. So some questions that we're addressing in this area, how do you really use these domain ontologies in different tools? And so we're writing APIs for different types of tools like CTakes, our own tools, PyContext. Which methods work best for which type of concepts? How do we incorporate the feedback? That's a big research question. And so we've done it on the machine learning and had 1 or 2 publications on that. But what about rule-based systems? How do we incorporate the feedback from users on that? And how do we suggest changes? And so lots of research in that area. All right. Well, sometimes you need a classifier. And oftentimes you need it after the NLP. And so you get all this NLP evidence, and now you need to determine for the report or for the patient, what's the value of the variable? Did the patient have pneumonia, for instance? So we developed a tool called TextVect, which is based on the idea that you already have a training set at the document level, for instance. And so now you want to create a classifier. And typically, you use Weka or Mallet, and there's all kinds of different tools that you can use, or writing your own. And they'll use n-grams. But there's evidence from NLP systems that could help improve the classification performance. But people building these classifiers typically aren't that familiar with the NLP literature and tools, and they have to go read up and find out what they all are and install them and get them going. So the idea behind this is it's a UEMA pipeline. It has a bunch of different NLP tools already in it, part-of-speech taggers, CTakes, negation, etc. And now you can select what types of features you want to use in your classifier. You can select the representation you want, whether it's binary, count, or TF-IDF, and then you run it, and the output is a vector that now you can train your classifiers on. And you can do some of the training inside here, but so we evaluated that on the I2B2 training set and showed that it could perform almost as well as the best systems just out of the box by using these default tools that we had installed. So still questions, what's the best representation of these complicated NLP features? What features are more useful, and what type of NLP tools can really help in classifier development? So one thing that people found is mapping to concepts can be helpful, because now words like shortness of breath become the concept shortness of breath and not shortness of and breath, and so it can reduce your feature space, for one thing. But negation can be very important. So differentiating between shortness of breath and no shortness of breath. We've looked at history and family experiencer, and those we haven't found as strong of a need to mark them in your feature vector. But there's lots of, if you create these information models to represent, no family history of colon cancer, how do you represent that in your machine learning feature? Finally, you want to build. People, like I said, don't want an XML file. They're working. The domain expert is working with you because they want to create, for instance, they want to create a dashboard to find all the patients who have some kidney infection, and they want to be able to see, oh, that patient has a kidney infection, I need to pay attention to them or call them or whatever. Or they want to create a timeline and see what's happened over the patient's history. So how do we help people create visualizations? And the vision behind this is that, just like Excel, if you have your data in a certain form, you should be able to render it as a table or a bar chart or a pie chart. The same way, if you have the text annotated, you should be able to render it in a lot of different visual ways depending on what people are interested in. And there are a lot of libraries out there like D3 and others to help build those types of visualizations. Some of the visualizations that we've found people are interested in with our collaborators would be like a population view. I want to look for patients who have pneumonia, and there's such a big set of patients to look at. Where do I start? Well, if I could cluster them in ways that are similar, now I can focus on a particular cluster of patients and only look at those first. Kind of a view, like an EMR-centric view, where you're looking at the patient. And if you're doing chart review on a patient and you want to find a patient that have these symptoms or physical exam or labs that are indicative of pneumonia, could you show in one glance the positive, negative, and uncertain evidence, which is marked with colors there, for the different features in your domain ontology? And now as they look through them, they can click on them and it shows the text that it came from, so that they can see the evidence and just more quickly peruse the whole patient's record rather than having to just search through one document at a time. Maybe you're looking for a particular case definition. Does this patient fit this case definition? And in chart review, this is often the case. Does this patient fit the CDC's definition of pneumonia? And so here's a diagram of the CDC's definition, and you could link the evidence from the text to the items in the diagram, and they can just more quickly go through the diagram and look at the text and make that conclusion. Timelines are another area that's becoming, it's always been important, but it's so difficult. So we did a little bit of research on this. How do you build a timeline that is useful from text? Because consider the scenario where you take over a new patient, or you come to the hospital and you've been off for one or 2 days and now you're taking over, and you want to say what's happened to this patient in the last 2 days. And the way it currently is you take about 3 minutes and you look through the most recent reports and things, and that's all you get. But what if you could just summarize everything over time, and then the things that were really of interest you could drill down on and look at the text? We started on this, and we built some really cool tools to help users like drag over and create timelines. The hard part for us, it's not the NLP so much, it's how you put information together. There are a lot of annotations in a report from an NLP system, and you can't put 100 or 150 of them on this timeline. So, and some of them need to go together. Like they had a chest x-ray. The chest x-ray showed this. Those things need to be clustered in one place. It doesn't make sense if they're in different places on the timeline. And so the cognitive part about what information should be put together is where we didn't get past that part. Yeah.
So that the timeline, the text, the sequencing of the text actually represents the timeline.
Yeah.
That assumption must presumably be false. You have to actually mine.
Say that a little louder.
Presumably you can't read the timeline directly off the ordering of the information in the text.
Oh,
that
yeah.
there will be backwards looking information that is and said it almost parenthetically, he was admitted to some other hospital 3 weeks earlier or something like that.
Yeah, you could in the way that this report came sooner, is less far away than this other report, which was 2 weeks ago. Yeah, but it's pretty close. But within the report, they're going to talk about things that happened years ago, and they're going to talk about things that are hypothetical or in the future. And so within the report, you have to be able to understand the relation of those items to the time the report was dictated to. Yep. Okay, so some things, like I said, we've just done preliminary work on these things, but what are the visualizations people want, and can we increase people's efficiency in looking at the chart while not hurting their accuracy? And also, an important area is like cognitive bias. If you are looking at a patient to determine whether to treat them for pneumonia, and so you start looking back on the different evidence, and you see some positive evidence for pneumonia, then as a human, you're going to have this cognitive bias to say, oh, they have pneumonia because they had a cough. And now you're going to probably ignore negative evidence and not look for things that will go against your own hypothesis. And when you think about politics, we all do that. And we just feed ourselves with the things that we already believe. And so how do we prevent against that? If we could point out to them contradictory evidence and point out to them evidence that's ambiguous or uncertain, then we might help them make better decisions. So we've done a lot of work on, well, what are the things you might point out for what indicates uncertainty? How do they linguistically express uncertainty? And how does that affect what people see? So we're in the middle of analyzing some data on that. Yeah.
So a related question is so you mentioned there are two ways that things could be uncertain. It could be the doctor saying sort of hedging or saying uncertain thing. Yeah. But it also could be based on background knowledge that this thing might indicate something other than pneumonia.
Yeah.
So it seems to also suggest if you consider multiple disease together, then you could potentially explaining away some of the evidence.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be the case?
So you're saying if there are multiple, if they lift a dead...
if you consider only any cause for symptom for pneumonia, you might miss some other symptom which are indicative of another disease.
Yeah.
So when you saw the symptom, then you say, oh, this cannot be pneumonia. This must be something else.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you think about pre-annotating text to help people review it, we typically think of marking the positive evidence. We don't think of marking the things that oppose that, but we really want them to look at that. And so if there are other diagnoses that they mention that are contradictory, or findings that might compete with the findings that indicate pneumonia, then you'd want to point those out. Yeah, so in our study, which we focused on pneumonia first, we had physicians mark, like not radiologists, but physicians mark radiology reports and other clinical reports and say, mark everything that supports pneumonia, refutes pneumonia, or causes uncertainty in your mind. And those were we had 7 people, and they were very different on what they thought caused uncertainty. So if someone said this supports and someone said this refutes, or someone said this supports and someone said this is uncertain, then we called that uncertain because it caused disagreement too. And then we use that information and analyze it linguistically, and about 20% of it is words like could be or might be. But the other 80% is the particular finding, like they mentioned atelectasis. Well, that's competing to pneumonia. Or they say, this is an opacity consistent with pneumonia. So they're linking a finding with a diagnosis, but the reason they're linking it is there's kind of uncertainty there, and so, yeah. Yep.
I'm kind of curious about without your visualizations, the way that a doctor is writing the medical record, he's kind of assuming a doctor is going to read the text that was written. So in a way, it's sort of like a visualization, right? So I'm kind of curious if the doctors write in a way assuming that it's going to be read by another person, like they write extra terse or kind of ordered in a certain way. Whereas if they knew that it was then going to go through a system and be visualized, I wonder if they would change the way they even write. Like if they would give more detail or write in a different order or anything like that.
That's a really good point. And I think sometimes they do think about the reader, and they're really trying to lay it out for the reader. And other times they're just more worried. They think the purpose of it is just to protect their butts and for documentation and billing. And so they're copying and pasting, and they're just putting these huge things in that are so unreadable and duplicative and not right, and they still are doing it because they feel like it's not, no one's going to look at this and it's just a waste of my time. So their intent and what they think it's going to be used for, I think, very much plays into how they organize it.
Do they copy and paste? Does the system assist them in the copy? Like they just kind of check some boxes and it shoves a bunch of text in the record, or are they just, do you think they're actually physically?
They physically copy and paste.
Okay.
Like they'll oftentimes they'll use these reports. They'll take a whole day to write the report, and they'll do a little at a time because they're using it to help reason and make their own diagnosis. And then they're waiting for a lab test. Now they get the results of the lab test. They go in, rather than type, here's what the lab test said, they just go copy it and paste it in. So wouldn't it be nice if you had a pointer instead? And there's all kinds of things. And they have their own, depending on the hospital, they have their own templates, their own macros that they can put in that they've made up. Yeah.
So I'm a physician, and I've been a physician for 35 years. Moved from doing things on paper, doing things electronic, dictation. What I see happening in the vendor community right now, the reason I applaud this work is that if anything, the vendor community is trying to get physicians totally off of free text and creating solutions that are an absolute nightmare of click boxes and trying to codify everything into individual units.
Yeah.
And you mentioned copy and paste. If anything, I mean, the whole industry is coming down on that because of all the errors it's introducing in the medical record.
Yeah.
So, do you see, I see the research applications for this. My concern is really what we're doing to the end users in the clinical space. And I'm just seeing my colleagues now just suffering. Like the things that used to take 2 seconds to do take 10 minutes to do.
Yeah.
And they're all complaining about it. So as you look at your work and what people in your field are trying to do, what's the direction? Is it more towards, reviewing these large bodies of data for population health and sort of, codifying it, or how much of it is really aimed at helping the end user?
Yeah, I think the end user gets ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the people making the decisions about what vendor systems to buy, et cetera. It's all based on they're going to improve their billing, they're going to improve their population management, which will cut down their costs and things like that. And the physicians and the nurses, they just get stuck. And so we have a faculty member, Charlene Weir, who's a cognitive psychologist. And she's going around and she's observing them as we installed Epic. And so she's observing what they do and making note of what are the pain points, what's going well. And when we bring those to our CMIO, he's like, I already know about those things. Don't tell me those things because there's nothing we can do about them. And now you're just getting people's hopes up. And they think we're going to change and we're not because there's nothing we can do about it. So it's just very fatalistic and they're just like, oh. But so I think one of the big paradigm shifters that's coming is kind of this smart on FHIR. Have people heard about this? With FHIR, this new interoperability standard, FHIR. And we could have a whole talk about that. But it opens up the opportunity that you can say, for instance, in rheumatology, okay, dermatology. Our dermatology chair is just so angry about Epic because it's cut down the number of patients they can see by almost a third. So they've lost so much money and they just spend it all documenting. Because Epic doesn't have a good dermatology, they're not going to pay attention to dermatologists. It's a very small market. So there are companies out there that create dermatology interfaces and they can just go really fast and it's very intuitive and it's visual, but it doesn't hook onto Epic. And so no way are we going to consider it. But with FHIR, you can, if you can write to the same specifications and if Epic supports it, now you can plug it into Epic, you can plug it into Cerner, and you can create these custom interfaces that really help the end user. So I see that as a hopeful area in the future.
So would you say is your work really balanced toward both sort of the research context and the end user experience?
Yeah. So back to NLP. I think that NLP has to play a large role in that. I think that there are some things that should be filled out in structured form. But there are a lot of things that you just need the text. When you say the patient crawled to her mailbox to get her mail, there's no checkbox for that, and there's a lot of information that tells you about the patient's motivation, their physical state. And so there are just there are stories that need to be told in text. And the NLP needs to be there. And to me, I see it as a really semi-automated thing.
I think what we've done is we're forcing humans to change behaviors to suit the machine versus the other way around.
That's right.
And they're the most inexpensive piece of the whole system, too. Right?
Absolutely,
I mean, it's
yeah.
these doctors that have been practicing in school for
Yeah.
12 years and
Yeah, talk about
specialists.
cost of driving care.
Are we doing is there anything in here that's also speech, dictation, that is doing automatic translation, and then either feedback that says, especially when they're going into the report, I mean, it's much more, I think you had at the very beginning, you had called out, I want to do assistive. We're not ready for doing it all on our own. Machines are not capable of doing it yet.
Yeah.
But have you done anything in terms of usability, and how do you make it so that this is assistive technology, so they can be much more productive? And our new charter here at Microsoft is to make everybody more productive, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of quite right, did it?
You're on record.
I know, I'm gonna have to talk to those guys. But I mean, I think that a lot of advances can be made if we try and do a machine-man collaborative.
Yeah, creating these
advance.
interactive, you picture like in radiology or anything, if you're doing speech at the same time and then you're looking at completeness, oh, you mentioned this but you didn't mention this, and we expect to see that, so you can help with completeness. You can ask questions, these contradict. You could really help improve the quality if people are willing, and I don't know, I think speech is getting to that accuracy, and so I think there's more possibility for it.
There's still a lot of training you would have to do for specialized in the space, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in terms of the use in
becoming
the
more
home and
feasible.
where we're going, it's getting much better than it was. But there's still the
Yeah.
context and all sorts of stuff that has to go on.
Right, and this is why, one reason why NLP and other medical type applications are so slow. I mean, they have to understand a lot of domain knowledge. And so that it takes a lot of customization, a lot of fine tuning around a particular domain.
There used to be a lot of dictation and transcription, is that still going on?
Yeah.
So would step one for getting the domain knowledge be working with a transcriptionist to make the transcriptionist more productive? I mean, here's the transcription, here's the dialogue, here's the everything going on.
Yeah.
So doing a partial.
It's not real time. You lose that real time opportunity, but
Agreed. I mean, step one is,
You have the opportunity to learn from the transcriptionist's corrections to the
right.
transcript.
Yeah, so
So that
that's
you-
a business model for M-Modal. I don't know if you guys know the M-Modal company in Pittsburgh. And that's what they're a transcription service. But they do it through speech recognition. The transcriptionist changes it, and then they run NLP, and then the user corrects it, and they send back a coded document. It's a really nice model, but it's not real time. But it could get to real
you
time.
could get to real time with advances. But
Yeah.
I mean, and you did say that, so it was M-Model?
M-Modal.
M-Modal. But they are feeding back in those changes so that you're
Yeah.
building a learning system,
Yep.
so that hopefully you're getting more and more productive. And
Yeah.
the transcriptionist is faster and better.
Yep.
And less
Yeah.
time is spent on each one because there's fewer errors.
That's right. And that's another reason why industry and research really needs to work together on this. Because the researchers have the idea about the bigger picture, about the workflow and the detailed kind of NLP things, but we are not going to build an interactive speech recognition system for radiology that's really going to be deployable in the next few years on our research grants. Maybe you guys can. Hopefully you guys can. Okay, so NLP is starting to show up places, and the promise of electronic medical records, the promise of natural language processing may be closer than ever. This was in JAMA, which is amazing to have an article about NLP and an editorial about NLP in JAMA. But it's around the corner, and that corner just doesn't feel like it's getting very much closer. But as we start to build applications that will assist users, I think that we can get closer to that. And it's not throwing out research. There's all kinds of research questions that have to be answered to really get there. So I say, come join us in this quest. And I want to acknowledge my collaborators and my lab and conclude with, you guys know where this is? It's sand. That's White Sands National Park in New Mexico. So thinking about context, you're probably thinking, I'm from Utah, I just talked about a snowstorm, but it's not, it's sand in the summer. Thank you, everybody. And I'll take any more questions.
So a question for you in medical devices. So you're now starting to advise a physician. The transition from advice to practicing medicine and medical devices, what is it where you've got to start having FDA and the whole
Yeah.
approval process in your thinking from?
Well, I think everyone's really worried about that. And I don't know the answer. And it could change at any time. So I think right now it's okay. It's safe with decision support systems. But at some point, it's going to flip. So I'm not sure. It's a good question.
As soon as it gets to the point where the human, i.e. clinician, is looking at the data to render a diagnosis or make a decision, that's when the FDA starts getting really excited.
What I saw, the support was, we see this and we think this is the treatment plan, here's the biotic that is
Yeah,
compatible.
that
That's practice to me.
Yes, and that
And
gets
I
them
would
real
have got
excited.
that one
That gets
red
them really
flag.
excited.
But there's also the thing that eventually it comes to the point where if you're not giving them that advice, then you're doing something, that's malpractice. Because that knowledge is available. Why are you not pulling out that information that is there for them that they can't find because you've hidden it in so many places? Why are you not giving it to them so they can make a better decision? And there are guidelines about here's what you always do in this case. So I think it's complicated.
So I think there's lots of other mining. I mean, we talked briefly before, is that part of this, if you want to go back and look at machine learning over outcomes, and you want to actually improve care, and you want to move the state of the art forward, we have to have certain things coming out of the medical records, which is sort of all the germane things that lead up to the disease. You've got the diagnosis, then the germane things during treatment, and then outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any hope that we'll see this in a concise form, reasonable form, complete form? There's never going to be a complete form in my mental model. But are we anywhere, where are we on the path to actually being able to generate that from, in the example of the Million Veterans Program or any other?
To be able to generate all the data that you need to do the genotype, phenotype, and really do personalized kind of
Well, to do
treatment.
personalized medicine, whether it's genotype, phenotype, and even just doing best practices, right? So if Clinic A in South Dakota is doing something or other, and they're doing something very different over in Minneapolis, you would like to make sure that, one, the cases are similar enough, if not identical, which is never the case, but close enough that when they've got the care in Minneapolis working, and now they want to help disseminate that information, how do you make sure that the evidence is there supporting this is a best practice, and that it is there. And we're not going to be doing clinical trials when we start getting down to the personalized medicine. It's going to be a clinical trial of or
so
some small number. You're going to be using statistics, you're going to be using this, which is all learning, which means we've got to be extracting the computable form of the medical record.
I think there are a lot of steps to making that happen, and we're on that path. One important step is a system called Open Computerized Decision Support, or Open Clinical Decision Support. It's an open source way of delivering that knowledge, so that if you author your knowledge with these certain standards in Minneapolis and at the Mayo, and it works well, now someone else can port it to their own place, whereas now that's not possible. And so being able to share that knowledge and deliver it in a different institution is one of the major steps needed for that.
And do we have the political, legal framework in place to do the sharing?
I think so. I think as long as it's not actual data about your patients, people are fairly happy to share their guidelines, or they publish them, and putting them in computable format. I think people are willing to do that in general. I could be wrong.
That's not the statistical. That's here's my recommendations, and so they've already done whatever statistics they have.
I'm sure they're willing to share it for a price. I mean, hospitals want to become more commercial, and they create a predictive analytics system that works well. They'd like to market it and share it in that way.
Here in the US, have socialized medicine, Canada, UK, China.
I think there's a desire to share knowledge, at least in the academic medical centers. And you're the leader. You showed that this worked, and you're the leader, and now people are adopting it, and that shows your influence.
Could you perhaps say something more about the MVP project and what is the promise of it, and what are the barriers to actually making it happen?
Okay, I don't know very much about that project, really. I helped apply for one grant that would use the data from it, so I know it's hard to be able to use the data. And I think they have maybe 100,000 patients genotyped so far, and in the next year they'll have 200,000, so they have this kind of phased plan. And the genotype information is now linked to all their patient records, which are available to the researchers. Beyond that, I don't really.
But it's data, access to data.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned you have this grant, and how long do you expect to get the actual data?
Well, we applied. Okay, we applied for a grant to use the Million Veterans data, and we haven't heard back if we got the grant or not. But it's my impression you can't just use it. You have to apply for these opportunities. It's not just there for everyone to use. That I'm not positive about that, but I'm thinking that's true. Yeah, but
my recollection is you may even need to use it on their computers.
oh yeah, so we were talking about the accessing VA data is very difficult because there's lots of hurdles to actually getting the permission, and then when you do get the permission, it has to be on their servers, and they're very difficult to. They're difficult. They're just not. They crash. You can't get to them. It's just that you can't run your system because it's too. It takes too much CPU or whatever, and they don't have it. So there are lots of barriers.
It seems to be an easier solvable problem compared to all the other
It does.
shareable data.
Yeah, just buy a few more servers. I don't put it on the cloud.
I mean, we've spoken with people at the VA, and they are, by and large, a Microsoft shop.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I was there about a year ago.
Yeah. But they do need help.
They do.
They do need help.
Yeah.
They're managed.
Yeah, and they're not going to let you put that data somewhere else.
They're also very fundamental.
Yeah, that's the problem. The funding for it. They really don't like to spend money on IT.
But also even the sequencing, one of the reasons they volunteer genotyping instead of even exome sequencing is they don't have the funds to. They have huge numbers of samples biobank, but they don't have the funding authorization to actually go through.
To go through it. Oh, yeah.
And they have a lot of people that have said, yes, you can do it, but they don't have the process to actually get it done.
Yeah. That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And what do you think are the barriers? Because you were talking about open source and kind of your workbench. Is that getting are other institutions kind of taking that on, or what is the barrier to getting that more widely adopted?
The idea of like a workbench to pull in different NLP tools. Well, we haven't really developed it out very well yet, so that's the first barrier. I don't know. I'd be interested in you guys' thoughts about clinical NLP. It feels to me like 100 people working on the same things, and there aren't aligned incentives to really collaborate. You get your grant, you work on your research, so it's not. It's like we need someone to fund development of an application. And then you use the resources that people are developing and use them as consultants. But we as researchers are not going to be able to build out that big thing and sustain it. That's what I think. And the VA seems like a place that could potentially do that. They could hire someone to really build the applied, pull it all together kind of thing and maintain it, in theory.
Because when you had the slide of the African American person, is that, do you imagine that's the end user, that's the clinician wanting to see kind of information about?
Yeah, that's them defining with a kind of variables that they want to extract from text. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of us make our things open source, and so they're available in that way, but.
But there's still no, I mean, we make you've made your models available.
Yeah, we make the models if the data is not compliant. We make the code available.
Mm-hmm.
We sometimes can make the models available. I think the main bottleneck is the data sharing.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think it's not a good idea to have people trying to build this unifying tool because the description of that unifying tool may not be addressing the needs. I think everybody needs to work on what they're passionate about, but the data and the source code should be available that they progress in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then if you can build ways to quickly draw on all those different tools and evaluate them, and because it's a lot of work to adopt someone else's tool and map it to yours so that the input and the output align. It's a huge amount of work. and when there's dozens of them.
We worked on models where lots of people want to share data from early Windows, OLE, object linking, embedding, all sorts of things. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Making a model that people will do. What's the value? And until you identify a significantly important piece of work that is bringing value that people see, they appreciate, that is shared and common amongst a lot of people, it's going to be very, very hard to pull any of this together.
Yeah.
So getting a step that is going to gain enough momentum to say, I have, improved my productivity, I've done whatever the right metric is, getting a lot of people, especially researchers that are by their nature independent and want to be pushing the limits on different things, less about delivering value as much as working on exciting and interesting problems.
Yeah.
It's going to be really hard.
Yeah, and at the same time, if you just rely on companies to create these tools without researchers' input, you get Epic and Cerner and things that are really not useful. Thank you. In the real world, that are.
You guys, where's customer value? And
Right.
if you're looking at it from the IT and the business side, just mentioned at the beginning, it's very, very different than looking at it from the patient side.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where is the value to the patient? Am I getting better outcomes? No, I'm getting better billings. I'm getting better charging. I'm tracking the business better.
Yep.
And for lack of a better word, the bean counters are getting a little happier.
Yeah.
But are we really pushing that life expectancy up? Are we driving the cost down? No, we're not driving the cost down if the bean counters are there, because any cost that they take out of the system, they're going to put in their own pocket. So the costs are not, that's not the capitalist incentive.
Yeah, so we might be getting to a time in the future, we're getting to a time where value and the value for the patient and the value for the institution are getting aligned. And in that case, I think there will be more, they'll see more value in the research tools that come out.
From our experience, I've been at the University of Washington for the last 6 years now at the medical center. So in our experience, the most exciting projects usually come from clinicians when they are super excited about something. For example, we initiated a project very recently, in fact, that involves speech, where we built this app. Mainly the doctor talks to the phone, and then through a secure channel, it's transferred to a server, and then it's mapped to a text file where the clinician himself edits it. And the study will be is, can we apply some sort of light parsing on the top of it so that it will be more nice looking in terms of editing purposes. And now we initiated a pilot study where the physicians are measuring their time, how much they're improving their time in terms of cost. And also to prevent how many times that are making less errors kind of analysis. And they are loving it apparently. So yeah, that's good.
Well, if you can get the data to the server quickly and you can do the analysis and you can be assistive in, you have ambiguity in this diagnosis, you can resolve some of this ambiguity by doing this test and giving them constructive feedback to, drive to a better one. But you've got to be able to do that quickly, and that's, how do we
All those
spin
steps.
that up?
Yeah.
But it involves a fair enough. You can do a small project.
It's a very small pilot project, but it's kind of it's a nice way to measure the impact of an automated system and how people are receptive to use that, rather than seeing after seeing 10 patients, they sit in front of the computer writing their reports. We'll see how it will go at the University of
And I
Washington.
think that here you're seeing that the value of the people that are going to be advocating for it are not the NLP people.
No.
It's you said earlier, the end user and then user-centered design. How do you get the high-value people in the system saying, this is adding value to me. I am being more productive, I am being more accurate, I'm being more whatever, because I'm getting this assistive technology.
Yeah.
How do you maintain freshness of the data? For example, if there's a treatment, a new drug comes out, and within 3 weeks everybody needs to be using it because this is the one that has the right effect. But it's not going to show up in your data because it hasn't been processed yet. How do you?
Yeah, so that's a big problem, like the lag in discovery and application. And people have shown I think it's 17 years?
I've heard 10 to 17 years.
Between the time that everyone realizes and agrees that something's the important way and it's actually used regularly in practice. So there's that. So if you're going to mine clinical records to try to learn things, you're going to be way behind. I think that's right. And you have to keep that in mind. It doesn't mean don't do it, but it means just because this is how people do it doesn't mean that's the right way to do it necessarily. Yeah, I guess then you need the literature combined with the clinical record.
It's always interesting when you have medical records and literature that contradict each other.
Yeah, that's always interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.